some of the negative experiences of competition, but it's also important to look at, how competition fits in with skill development or skill mastery. So an important objective is to help kids develop their physical, technical sport skills. Competition can also hurt these skill development and mastery processes. So often what you can find is that kids, the focus will be on the game, preparing for a game and winning the game or winning a tournament. Or winning a certain competition. So often adult coaches can lose the sight of the key objectives of skill development in their kind of, zest or wanting or motivation to compete and win. So it's really important that when we're delivering sport and activity, yes, we've got a competition coming up, we've got an event, but we still focus our attention on developing that skills. So even maybe we don't always get the outcome in that game or tournament or fixture that we've got, that you see an improvement in their children's skills, because ultimately that's going to have a better long-term benefits than maybe having one player on the team and all the focus is on them and them scoring, than actually investing in developing the whole team as a team approach, but also the skills of each player. Often, you'll see this, competition can hurt that skill development, so regulating smaller or less skilled athletes to less central positions, or putting them on the bench, hiding them so they won't hurt the team's performance. And as I've already mentioned, putting all the emphasis on one player, the best player in a team, to a certain position. So it could be, basketball is quite a good example, putting the best player in point guard and no one else getting to play that position. So competition versus decompetition. So sport has become, in some people's eyes, too competitive. Should sport be about cooperative games and learning? I definitely think there's a place for all of the elements. So, having an element of competition, but also really important to ensure that we develop activities and sessions and programs that develop cooperation and all those key psychosocial skills we've talked about, but also ensure that we're making kids learn and develop their skills. Competition can be fun, exciting, and it's very motivational for kids. They love playing games, they love having a game at the end of a practice, as long as it's conducted and introduced and conducted in a manner that's developmentally appropriate to that individual or that group. On the flip side, obviously, as mentioned, there's some negative outcomes of sport, some of those psychosocial, but also links to competition. So it can lead aggression, anger, intimidation and cheating. So I think that example, the YouTube video I asked you to watch, really demonstrates how a coach can impact and influence their players in a negative way. So at the start I said, the question I posed is, where does fun fit into sport? And I think it's a really important factor to include in youth sport. We don't want to just be focused on performance and competition. Multiple research studies over the last 3 decades have shown that to have fun is the main reason that kids aged 5 to 17 want to play and be involved in youth sport. So coaches should build in a few drills and activities that are fun, along with activities that require a focused effort, concentration. A fun factor is essential in learning and skill development. We all know that if you're in a session or a lecture or a class, if the activity is interesting and fun, we're more likely to engage and remember it. Whereas if it's a boring task and we're not interested, then it's going to increase that motivation and disengage people. So enjoyment and love of the sport is crucial, because ultimately if you haven't got that motivation to carry on, then you're not going to be motivated to turn up to practices, definitely for some of the individual sports, multiple times a week, invest those hours. You've got to love it. So making that activity fun from a very early age through to adulthood is really important. So we're going to focus on these next 2 topics in a little bit more detail when we look at sport specialisation in sport and the talent ID and early specialisation. But I'm going to touch and bring these concepts in because they're key parts of youth sport and they're an important part of this introductory session. The next area I'm going to look at is the multidimensional or unidimensional element of sport. So should kids be specialising early? We will look at this in more detail as we progress through the weeks, but should kids be specialising in one sport rather than diversifying and sampling multiple activities? Should children sample a variety of activities and then of course narrow in their focus and their skills into a particular interest as they mature? So as you can see from this sporting structure, we've already looked at this in a little brief bit of detail. We've got this kind of basically is that approach of kind of narrowing that down. We've got that recreational level at the bottom there. We start to kind of play some school sport. We may play for a couple of different teams, different sports, experience them, carry on, and then we're now going to start narrowing that focus down. When we're that college, starting getting to kind of a professional level, working towards elite. So we have this approach in terms of past structures, As I mentioned, there are different pathways and structures in sports, so we may not all get to that elite point, and we may just carry on playing a range of sports. Me, for example, I definitely didn't get to that elite top level of sport, but I enjoyed playing, collegiate level, a couple of sports, obviously within seasons. So it's around catering and putting programs together for specific athletes. So there may be some kids that don't move up to that top tier. So it's about making sure that that pathway is right for them. So throughout this session, I've looked at kind of key objectives, some key issues, and things to be thinking about when we're planning and delivering sport. Now I'm going to highlight some kind of pitfalls in youth sport or the dueling objectives. A common pitfall in youth sport is to pay more attention to the athletes who are more physically mature or have better skills. At an elite level, coaches identify the most talented athletes, and those athletes receive more attention because they will help their teams win. This isn't always the best approach, so especially when working with children and youth, people grow and develop in different ways. So what you might find, a kid who's maybe slightly smaller, at a younger age, and you've got a larger child, more time will be invested in that older kid, not older kid, but more mature kid who's stronger and more agile and can move and kind of beat the smaller children. So we spend more time developing those skills, but then there's maybe a really talented, athlete who hasn't just grown and matured yet, who is potentially, if you invest the same amount of time, could be better, as they're going to have their growth spurt at a different point. So it's really important when we're planning activities and we're planning our sessions that we're catering for all the needs and different abilities. So the key message from here, objectives of youth sport should differ from those of elite sport, and we tend to forget that. Kids are not miniature adults, they are continually growing, maturing and developing. Our objective should be to develop every child's talent instead of attempting to prematurely identify talented children, who then receive more attention from coaches and have better learning opportunities. Everyone should have the equal opportunity to learn and develop. As we move into next week's session and we look at growth and maturation, some of these key points around these pitfalls will be looked at in more detail. A second negative, which is basically inherent a consequence of youth sport, is a cultural thing, is the creation of spectator ethos by the pyramid model. So we've looked at the pyramid model. It has a broad base of many participants in school, physical education, recreational sport, community events, intramural activities. However, these number of participants decrease according to an up and out mentality, based on the idea that athletes have to make the cut and that to move up those levels, become involved, continue as performers, or else discontinue participation. So what it's saying basically, you move up, and if you don't hit the level, you're out. I'm pleased to say this kind of model is an older model, and lots of other things have come in place to improve that. So there is exit routes at all levels of that kind of pyramid tier, so kids and adults can still take part in sport. The pyramid model also influenced kids to move from participation ethos to a spectator ethos. So if they can't take part, if they're in, for example, US high school is a really good example. They don't make, the football team or the soccer team or the basketball team, then they have a massive spectatorship where the kids then go and watch each other. So that basically this model inherits that spectator ethos. So what we're saying is the lack of exit routes and continuing participation, the pyramid model greatly contributes to sedentary lifestyles and health problems that result from those inactive lifestyles. So what we're saying is, we looked at the palm tree model in a previous video, and there's lots of other models which you're going to look at when we look at structures and pathways in sport. So here we've got a task for you. What I'd like you to do, come up with what you think 3 broad objectives of youth sport are, and what I'd like you to do, explain why each of your objectives is important. Also, identify any dueling objectives of youth sport. So what are the things that go against each other? Now what I'd like to do, use the internet, or you may have an example of your own, search for and identify a positive youth development programme that uses sport and physical activity to teach positive values to kids. So I've talked about objectives and the positive outcomes and objectives of sport, so can you think of and identify any programmes that align to that? Describe the programme, maybe include information of its philosophy and objectives, as well as any positive outcomes that have been documented as a result of this programme. And then finally, what I'd like you to do is provide an assessment on, or your opinion about the effectiveness of this programme. So basically I'm asking you to do a little review of a sport programme in terms of its impact, what it does, objectives and the outcomes. Hopefully you managed to find an example and it started to get you thinking of some ideas and some of the impacts, how we plan and organise sport and thinking about youth sport and concentrating on making sure it's developmentally appropriate. And that is at all levels. It could be down to a coach delivering a session, an academy putting a structure together, a programme being delivered with key objectives and all these key things in line. So it's not just about a coach delivering. There's lots of different infrastructure within youth sport which is going to have an impact to make sure that activity is appropriate for our children and youth that are involved in them. Obviously the last couple of sessions have been very much an introduction to this module to highlight some key elements that we're going to continue to look at as we progress through the weeks. But hopefully it's given you a little kind of start point to start thinking about, if we're planning sport and we're delivering sport and we're working in sport, making sure that we're aligning it to appropriate activities and appropriate systems of structures for children and youth.